So in the Egyptian 2011 revolution, among the major protagonists, both on the ground and in its mediatic representation, the so-called popular committees, Al-Ligan al-Sha'biyya, and are among the major actors. They were born spontaneously in many quarters in Cairo and in other Egyptian cities in the wake of the disappearance of the police in the first days of the revolution in 2011. And they could be described at the beginning as associations of citizens who defended their houses and neighborhoods. Hundreds of Ligan, of committees, were constituted within a few days, and they seem to offer a paramount example of new forms of civic associations, improvised and devoted to the peaceful maintenance of the public order in the absence of state apparatuses. Parallel to this role, however, Ligan were also present in demonstrations against Mubarak all over the country. In the midst of the truly impressive demonstrations that I believe we all have very vivid in the memory, these committees appeared mostly as technical support to demonstrators, securing entrances to squares where rallies were held to keep agitators and armed bandits out. After the end of the revolutionary moment, so the first 18 days between 25th January 2011 and the 11th of February 2011, when Mubarak stepped down and public order was more or less restored due to intervention of the army, their existence largely terminated. In some places, however, they continued more or less as a political actor among many others, or in some cases as a more sinister presence, attempting to impose itself as a security actor. Then we also would like to move to the second phase of the revolution, or what terminated it. Now, we don't want to enter into the political debate in this workshop, but to 2013, when the first democratic elected president of Egypt was deposed, and his supporters were dealt with as enemies from the army. And in this phase, Ligan appeared again. Both factions, so the Muslim Brotherhood supporting the President Mohamed Morsi and his opponents, organized Ligan, both in the more technical sense of support demonstrations and as neighborhood initiated attempts at providing security to different neighborhoods. And in 2013, the role was much more contested than in 2011. So, as was said, at least in the first day, I hope in the second day you didn't change. So this vigilantism is a very highly ambivalent phenomenon. And we found this in the case of Ligan as well. So at the beginning, during the first part of the revolution, they were mostly presented as an integral part of the revolutionary moment, but there is never a clear definition of what a popular committee is. There is always some ambiguity over its formation. So in some articles, as I will try to say later, it is mentioned that citizens spontaneously organized this. In some other cases, particularly outside the big cities, it is mostly organized by leaders, be they religious or tribal. So this spontaneous character is a little bit less evident. And also their scope. So while in Tahrir Square, they were opposed to the police, in many places they actually cooperated, at least with the army, and in some provinces, even with the police, to round up fugitives from the prisons, because on 28th of January, Mubarak withdrew the police from Egypt and also from prisons. So for 4 days, between 28th of January, 5 days, and 2nd of February, there was no security in the country. After the revolutionary moment of the first 18 days, this polygamy increases. So at the same time, they are agents of the revolution and collaborating with state apparatuses against which the revolution is waged. And so they are a paradox. And also the extent to which they provide security and safety is unclear. Often, the same newspaper runs different stories on the same day, in which committees are represented as performing different, if not opposing, roles in different places. And of course, in 2013, these committees are presented in much more sinister terms, at times akin to armed militias that could be used to undermine Egypt's security, particularly by Islamist forces. And still, even in this phase, they still are presented as technical stuff, kind of technical stuff, securing demonstrations. All right, I think I can handle it to Aymon for the moment.
So, in regard of the core question of this workshop, which is vigilantism, and again, I repeat this disclaimer: we are not specialists of vigilantism, so we're very looking forward to your feedback. One first point, the case of vigilantism, of Lijan Charbia, sorry, brings acutely forward is the issue of translation. Some of the uses Daniele already mentioned of the notion correspond to the phenomenon of vigilantes as it has been studied across the world to our knowledge. Groups of self-organized neighborhood inhabitants taking the security of their place in their own hands and therefore navigating at the fringes of criminality. Some others do less correspond to this definition, as for instance, the security squads of demonstrations. One striking feature with the appearance of the popular committees or the Ligan Charbia, which appear both in Daniele's press survey, in my notes over the events unfolding in Cairo in 2011 and 2013 when I was there, is that we could not find or observe any debate about the meaning of the notion. It was as if it had been immediately graspable what such a committee is and what its goals are for everyone. Likewise, to our knowledge, there were no alternative denominations to them. Also, communications were difficult during the last days of January 2011, as the government had cut the internet and mobile phone networks in the country. The notion of popular committee has a history in the Arabic political vocabulary, of course. You could find popular committees, for instance, most famous example are the organizing committees of the first Intifada in Palestine, which were called Lijan Charbia. However, it still came a bit as a surprise that this word was so self-evident in this context and all across the country. One result of this general spread of the word, however, and this is something which is particularly interesting for our analysis, is that it opened the way for a multiplicity of sometimes conflicting reappropriations. It is likely that precisely these ill-defined outlines of the notion made its success. As an outcome, according to us, exploring the different meanings it took revealed the semantic battles unfolding during the 2011-2013 period in Egypt, around who's in charge of representing the people in the revolution, by being in charge of the popular committees, which represented a central stake of the symbolic struggles at the time. Likewise, it showed the ambivalence many felt toward the people, Shab, among journalists and beyond, when assimilating at time the popular committees surveilling the streets to the very bandits they were supposed to fight. The people during this period appears therefore as both the core legitimizing principle of Egyptian revolutionary history, as the nationalist historiography presents it since independence. The 1952 coup from Gamal Abdel Nasser was presented as a revolution. And since then, Egypt is a revolutionary country in the way it presents its own history. And so it's at the same time this core legitimizing principle of Egyptian history and a dangerous pleb, la populace, whose excesses need to be kept under control by strong repressive institutions. If we consider another key dimension of the literature on vigilantism, underlined notably by Ray Abrahams, the question of the inner frontiers of the state and how vigilantism can be a way for institutions to deal with territories inside the nation which are partly out of their reach. A specificity of the Egyptian popular committees is that the frontiers which come to the fore through the committees are less bound to space than to time. Indeed, these committees are not the result of a progressive abandoning of poor areas by state institutions, but of the historical rupture of the revolution, a turmoil whose importance people almost unanimously recognized, at the time at least, after came the debate. Different agents competed to embody a continuity in front of the crisis. The claim to represent the people I just mentioned participate to the effort to claim for oneself an overarching principle of history, the sovereign will of the Egyptian nation. Some would consider the true Egyptian people as best represented by the politicized crowds of Tahrir Square, who, according to a common revolutionary narrative, were reviving the spirit of 1882, 1990, and for some 1952 and 1977, were all years of important upheavals in the country. Others, on the contrary, would celebrate as the true Egyptian people, neighbors watching over the areas and thus trying to set them apart from the political struggles. And even, as I argued elsewhere with Samuli Schilke and Paula Abenante, as apart from the event. So as apart from national history, by representing the true continuity of the people in the neighborhood. This echoes my ethnographic experience of Cairene neighborhoods during the 2011-2013 period. And to a last dimension, of the literature on vigilantes, which seems relevant to study the Egyptian popular committees according to us. The manner in which vigilante groups act as power multiplier of state institutions, in certain contexts as an interlocutor of Nir Gazit in his research on Israeli settlers once put it. To understand it, one needs to consider how the popular committees participated to the stability, istiqrar, which the government supporters hailed all along the period. Moreover, the anti-politics unfolding at the level of popular committees, what I labeled in a book chapter, the paradoxical utopia of the statu quo. So this anti-politics, this paradoxical utopia, which many defended to maintain the everyday setting, the committee's members defined as normal or even as natural, these anti-politics echo a major claim of the Egyptian state since the 1952 coup at least, that the army is the model for a good functioning state as an institution situated above and apart from political disagreement. As such, the popular committees enter in resonance and amplify normalization politics actively sought out by state institutions since the very outset of the events, and which culminated after the 2013 military intervention and the following reinstatement of the state's repressive apparatus in its full power. I leave the word to Daniele.
Right. So we want to try to give you some details about what we've been saying until now. So the Ligan, the committees as a revolutionary force, in some articles, they are mentioned as a reference for the youth movement or committees of help and assistance for the defense of the revolution from pollution, al-talawuth. And youth committees are there to ensure safety, are there to lil hafiz al-amn, help the residents and help in securing access to water, food, and services. And in some, so these committees, so in these representation of the committees, they are clearly and explicitly linked with the revolution. as they enable protesters to join marches in big squares like Tahrir, but also elsewhere in Egypt, and are thus revolutionary in nature. However, and as we mentioned already a couple of times, they are at the same time seen as and presented as being mainly concerned with ensuring safety at the local level without a clear connection to the big political events that shake the country. And so in some instances, citizens protect banks, houses, and churches, for example, in Alexandria, through human circles or walls formed by elders, youth, and children, which confirm in the representation in the media, the national spirit, al-Ruh al-Wataniya, uniting Christians and Muslims. Such groups are defined as the popular opposition, Mukawama Shabiya, in Giza, for example, not in Gaza, in Giza, a southern neighborhood in Cairo, which is a city in itself. They are called the Popular Front, Jabhat Shabiya, formed by inhabitants, and the sheikh of the local mosque encourages youth to participate in them. And here again, this ambiguity. In some places, after some days, after the 28th of January, when police were retreated from the street, police start to return to the street, and at times it's presented as being somehow cooperating with Ligan, particularly outside Cairo. In some neighborhoods, Ligan acquired additional roles, such as controlling prices in grocery shops, foretelling the potential greed of merchants. And so let me try to move faster here. Errol, how much time do we have left? We have no time left. 1 minute. Oh wow! So let me just run. As I mentioned, Ligan have always, throughout all the phases of the Egyptian revolutions, also a very technical role, simply securing, maintaining order during demonstration. However, even within this relatively straightforward role, there is some ambiguity because they are sometimes presented as being revolutionary in nature. So their maintaining order is an attempt to help youth exercise their natural right in demonstrations demanding change against the system of corruption and inheritance. Tawrith, this would require different discussion that we don't do at the moment. So some in other cases, however, they are simply seen as checking IDs and checking that people wanting to demonstrate are not armed. So what exactly Ligan are, composed by whom, and for which goals, these remains open questions. And there are articles dealing directly with the role, but maybe we keep this for the discussion because time is running. And after the revolutions, after these 18 days, in some places, some Ligan continued more or less as political actors. And in some cases, they are listed among those trying to continue the revolution as a more or less coherent attempt. However, in the months leading up to the coup d'etat in June 2013, Ligan appear increasingly as armed militias, either linked to the Muslim Brothers or against them. There is even an attempt in April 2013, March, April 2013, from the Muslim Brotherhood to legalize the phenomenon of the Ligan as a kind of auxiliary police under the order of the president. This is failed. And so after the coup d'etat, and then if some of you may remember, the supporters of Mohammed Morsi gathered in a square, in 2 squares actually, and in several other places all over the country. And then they were violently dispersed with many, many casualties. And after these events, then Ligan, also in the press, become a security concern. So you have articles with titles like Enough, Crimes Committed in the Name of Ligan, Ligan and the Committees and the Concept of Wrong, and so on and so forth. So almost in full circle, we started with popular committees as a force for security, and this gets represented as a clear force being undermining security. And I leave it to Aymon for the very short conclusion.
In 2 words. So Just to keep it short, as a conclusion, we see around the description of the Lidewyde inside and outside the committees, how you have these struggles around what's the people, which become particularly strong in periods of upheaval, due to a certain semantic uncertainty, instability in these moments. And here I rely on Jean-Claude Passeron and on Pierre Bourdieu, Pierre Bourdieu's theory of the state. The trouble about the signification of what is happening and the urgency to ascribe meaning to a situation where routinized aspects of life are not taken for granted anymore lead to a heightened importance of these semantic struggles. And through this revealing more clearly the fault line running across society. When institutions who seem made to last forever suddenly start to crumble, telling what the period is about and who's the actors, the agents is all about, so all this period is all about, becomes a means to both critique and legitimate the society's orders as it was, as it shouldn't be, and as it has to become. And just to finish, the popular committees, both in the way they were described in the press and the way you could experience them at the level of the narrow street, are a good example of these tensions in a moment of rapid transformation of a country. Voilà, we're going to finish on that. Sorry, do we just pass the time a lot, or?
No, it's all right, I guess. We can
okay, good.
Thank you very much, though. It was really, like, I think you said that you don't work on it, but it still gave us like really the ambiguity. I think this is the very productive, like the core and kernel of like the issue that we have been dealing with. So I really enjoyed it. And then I think it communicates really well with like the following paper as well on Ghana by Richard Kyei and also Lidewyde Berckmoes. I hope I'm not mispronouncing names, but I think they all are also like going to talk about this like an ambiguity, both in enabling the political field to expand and also like constricting or like transfiguring the legal field and the authority. And then I'm gonna introduce Justice Richard Kyei as well. He's a lecturer in the Department of Sociology and Social Work at Kwame Nkrumah University of Science and Technology in Ghana. And then he's also like a visiting research fellow in the African Studies Center, Leiden, at Leiden University in the Netherlands. And then he has been working on political sociology, religion, and migration, and won 2019 African Peacebuilding Network individual research grant as well. The floor is yours, Richard. Rich, I assume that you are using Richard, not just.
Yeah. Yeah. So thank you very much for inviting me to be part of the workshop, and I really do appreciate it. Yeah, so the co-author is not here, so I'll be doing the presentation. I hope she'll join some in the process. So yeah, our presentation is about the topic obviously is political vigilante groups in Ghana, and then whether they are invariably violent groups, or they contribute in one way or the other to the democratization of Ghana. So that's the question that we raise, and then in our paper we try to explore the different ways in terms of how they fit in within the political space. So yeah, so a bit of background about Ghana. So since 1993 actually, from January 1993, when Ghana returned into democratic governance as the Fourth Republic, it has been in existence, or it continues to grow and also practice democratic governance through every 4 years, change of going to the polls. And there are two main political parties, there's the New Patriotic Party and the National Democratic Congress. So these two political parties are the main parties that have been changing power in terms of the executive and also more or less the parliamentary seats. So these two political parties have within the political party have some groups which they refer to themselves, the public more or less refer to them as vigilante groups. So, and they have also assumed that name upon themselves, and it's somehow in terms of the different aspects or the different ways in which vigilantism is presented in other arenas, for instance, maybe in Nigeria or in the Sahel regions. The Ghanaian case is somehow different because they are the political part, the vigilante groups referred to are not more or less opposing or distinctively separated from governance. They are with the political parties to elect or nominate presidential candidates and also select parliamentary candidates. So political parties are fundamental in our governance system. So if these vigilante groups are within these political parties, it's difficult to separate them from mainstream governance. So we give a definition, more or less a working definition for what political vigilantism is. And we define it as the activities of political party members or sympathizers that aim at contributing to the political growth of their political parties in building the nation state, without, however, negating the application of violence or force by these political vigilante groups. So these are more or less sections of political party members that come together to fight for their own political interests and also the political interests of their parties. And we are also in terms of how we conceptualize this. So within the conceptualization, we use the concept of field. At least with the concept of field, we have the space in which different actors compete, and then within that field, there are conflicts. So we argue that within the political field, yes, you have the political parties, the elites within the political field, but there are also other groups which normally they are considered as the youth wings of the political parties, but not directly youth wings, because there are different forms of youth wing that form the youth group. So they are also within the field and they are competing, even though they are not in the main line or do not have those strength as the political elites. And so democracy here, we do not have that street in the neoliberal democratic understanding, but we see it as an exercise of construction of participation and representation of different groups of people. Of our data we collected data from two different cities in 2019, in two cities in Kumasi and also in Tamale. And then in 2020, we had a follow-up interviews, and then we extended it to the Greater Accra region, and also we went back to Tamale and Kumasi just to have more robust information. And interestingly, these political vigilante groups within Ghana in 2019, actually, they were officially disbandment of these political vigilante groups. So we are also contesting how the law and also the lived experiences with the political vigilante groups. So even though there is a law which disbands political vigilante groups, but they are still within the political space competing in different ways. So when in terms of the data collection, there was that kind of the positionality of the researcher in the scenario, because going to the field, it wasn't just having that neutral idea about this political vigilantism, because it was just the time when the law on the disbandment of political vigilantism had just been passed. So, and within the public sphere, also they are presented as those violent groups who do not more or less understand anything and only cause troubles within the system. So these are things that were also bothering in discussing how to present them. But yes, we had to also be part of the creation of knowledge in terms of these of the activities of political vigilante groups. So through different means, we're able to get in touch with the political vigilante groups themselves and also some of the elite groups within the political parties. And from our findings, we have, at least we have in terms of the data, the demographic characteristics. So we have the age that varies from 18 years to 60, and also in terms of the gender or the female-male distribution, at least 109 were women and then 25. So in total, we had at 134 interviews. 25 were females. And in the educational background, more or less 44 had only basic education and 63 had secondary education. 13 were still in pursuing the undergraduate studies and 14 were graduates. So this brings, so it's about when they are classified as youth. So within the range of 18 to 60, at what point these classified as youth? Those who are 60 years, are they still youth? So is it because of their position within the political space that makes them youth? So these are certain things that we also question. And also, even though the female numbers are not that large, but we still argue that there are, so it's not just a masculine world, yes, even though the female or women are still underrepresented, but there are also some women who are also involved within the activities of political vigilante groups. So we had also about 8 different political vigilante groups. So, but for the sake of time, move straight to the findings, also still the discussion and some of the themes that came up. So we have what we call the variation between political vigilante groups, and here we talk about the membership duration. Some of the political parties within the vigilante groups do classify themselves as members of a particular group. There are others also who do see themselves as just called-in members or membership on demand. So they just come in and then carry out an action and then move away. So they don't see themselves as group. They don't classify themselves as members of a particular group, but rather they are under tutelage of maybe one person. And when that person calls, then they come in to carry out the action, even though they are still within the political party. But there are others who also see themselves, they have that kind of historical line of membership within their group. So those people we talk about the membership duration. So that defines one particular political party from the other. And also in terms of the organizational structure. So some were more hierarchical in terms of who leads, and then from that bottom, top-bottom relation. So they have those structures where each one has its position within the political vigilante group. But also it's about longevity. So if those whose presence have been in existence since 1993 when we started the Fourth Republic, they have that kind of longevity, and because of that longevity, they've been able to establish those rankings within their system. But there are others who are just new, and they are not. The organizational structure is very weak. And in terms of also about what they do, so normally the discussion is around during and after, immediately after elections. So yes, during elections, they are engaged in electoral mobilization. So they mobilize people from different places, and because of the urban-rural distinction in Ghana. So there are places where maybe it's difficult for the political parties in terms of the higher structures to get there. But because these are localized groups, they are able to engage with the people and also invest their time and their resources in bringing in votes. And there are instances where they talked about spending risk in terms of buses and others to convey people, because you have not every village or every town has a polling station where they can vote. So these political vigilante groups take upon themselves and then convey the people to the different sites for voting. So these are activities that they carry on. And also even after elections and during the governance period, they also mobilize, if their party is in power, obviously, they engage with the political elites in bringing up resources to their community. So they could talk about some third roads within their facilities and also some public toilets which were constructed because of their presence. So somehow they are situating themselves in which, if you are to talk about the neoliberal governance, and situating themselves as civil society, because they are contributing in this way to the growth of to the strengthening of democracy and also the growth of the country. Yeah. So, and also another thing which also comes out is about the voice. So through this, they mobilize because they want to have a voice within the political field, because they realized as individuals it was difficult to come out with anything. But so they decided, because maybe their educational background was not so strong or what, they decided to come together as a group, and then as a group have a voice, and as a group, not just as group independent group, but group within the political, because they studied the political terrain in Ghana and realized that within the political field, you can either be within either NPP or NPC, that's the two political parties I talked about. So they affiliate themselves to these political parties so that their voice can be stronger, depending on if their political parties in power, even if it's not in power, as opposition within the political and opposition political party, they can still have the voice to also express themselves. So that's one thing that was identified during the research. And yes, violence is also something that comes up, and also conflict within in their activities. And in terms of violence, they talked about three main activities, or we categorize them into three in terms of what brings about the violence or the motivations. One is about communal, and the other one is institutional. And then, so the last one is personal. So the communal is where they are seeking for resources for their communities, and then they are not coming up. So therefore, they carry out violent activities, normally towards the political elites. So in terms of demonstration, which sometimes some are peaceful, some may not also be peaceful. And also institutional, when they need resources to, especially during elections, or yes, when they have to mobilize resources, and the elites are not bringing up those resources, then they are also sometimes violent. So they talk about situations where they seize the vehicles of some political elites so that they could carry out their political campaign activities. And personal, because they are into politics also as a form of profession. So when they themselves are not satisfied in terms of their needs, yes, sometimes they carry out these violent activities. Yeah, so without taking so much of the time, so in conclusion, we argue that the political field is has different actors, and these actors, in terms of resources, the resources are not equal, and because of that, some people have to the activities may not be as the political elite, but being a political vigilante, as forming a political vigilante group, they are able to push forward and be part of the governance system within the country. And also, we further, the political vigilantism in the Fourth Republic is not something new, because it has existed from even pre-independence, when Ghana was getting the 1950s, we have the Veranda Boys, we have the youth conferences. So these were groups that somehow carried out, were very strong in terms of advocating for independence and also advocating for democratic governance. So these vigilante groups, some of them drew, that's what we call the intergenerational linkage. So they drew their linkage from those times. So it's not something new in the political terrain of Ghana. And lastly, we also contested bringing about the idea of youth. So who is youth? Is youth just about the age, or is youth about the position within the in terms of resources one has? Because if someone within the from 50 to 60 is classified as youth because he or she belongs to the political vigilante group. Therefore, there's a need to question also the point of youth, classifying political vigilante groups as youth. Yes, so in conclusion, political vigilante groups are not groups that cannot, in the Fourth Republic, cannot just be disbanded by just a law, but it goes beyond. Yes, the law may disband them, but in the lived experience of the political field, they continue to thrive, and even after, and then contribute immensely to the political growth of Ghana, irrespective of the violence that occasionally come out from their activities. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Richard. This was a good dialogue between your research and then the Aymon and Daniele's, actually. I'm sure that something like productive will come out during the Q&A session. And then we will move on to our third speaker today, Andy Fuller. He's a postdoctoral fellow at the Sakrasek Research Project at the Cultural Anthropology Department at Utrecht University in the Netherlands, working with Martijn, actually. And then he has published on contemporary Indonesian literature before, and religious freedom and football fandom. And then he's currently about to do his start his field research in on religious vigilantism in Indonesia, Jakarta. I think he has been held back by the COVID restriction. And then today he's going to talk about how the circulation of imagery in contemporary Indonesia fuels vigilantism and how it instantiates different relations to the statecraft. The floor is yours.
Good afternoon, all. I've got a feeling you can see my screen. Thank you, Errol. Thank you, Errol. Yeah, so that's right. This paper I'm working on is a kind of preparation for my fieldwork, which I hope to be doing either later this year or early next year at the latest, depending on the COVID and vaccination, etc., etc. So basically, I'm working on a variety of textual resources, from literature and film to Instagram. So I'm looking at this vigilante group in Jakarta called the Forum Betawi Rempug. And the Betawi are the indigenous people of Jakarta. And I'm exploring how the idea of the Preman, which is a kind of local Indonesian vigilante or thug, and how this relates to contemporary practices of vigilantism in Indonesia. So I'm sort of jumping back and forth in between the fictional and the representational and what's happening on the ground in Jakarta. A post on Instagram here in the slide from the official account of Forum Betawi Rempug suggests that the way in which narrative plays a strong role in legitimizing the authority of this societal organization, or Ormas, in Jakarta. Accompanying the heroic image of the FBR's founder, Muhammad Fadloli, the deceased uncle of the current leader, it states, Fadlolli is a warrior who gave witness to the injustices suffered by the Betawi. He has passed away, but his memory cannot be erased. He was a warrior who made us realize that in this short life, meaning is achieved through knowledge of truth and forbearance. He was a warrior who embodied the idea that the Betawi are inspired by solidarity and will one day rise up and recapture their freedom. Time passes and history is created. The injustices against the Betawi, wherever they have taken place, will end in the uprising and the solidarity of the Betawi. This kind of evocation of a heroic figure and the generalized characterization of a marginalized ethnic group within Jakarta as a means for vigilante mobilization encourages a methodology which explores the role of discourse in shaping ideas about preman, gangsters, and vigilantes within the Indonesian context. This paper relates to my broader research questions of asking how is Jakarta being reshaped and reconfigured in a negotiation of Islamic norms and ideals. I'm interested in the roles of religious vigilantes and how they contest public space in Indonesia, in Jakarta in particular. As such, I seek to explore the ways in which the figure of the preman, a gangster or thug or vigilante, fits into this process of contesting the city. I'm using these textual resources as a way of mediating my different distance from Indonesia. I'm interested in the idea of megacity vigilantism. As presented by Lawrence Backer on the first day of this conference, various forms of vigilantism have emerged in post-New Order Indonesia over the last 20 or so years. In the case of the Forum Betawi Rempug, however, I'm interested in how vigilantism relates to the urban form, while also wondering how the city of Jakarta enables for a specific kind of vigilantism to emerge. What is the megacityness of this kind of vigilantism? My tracing of the genealogy of the preman of vigilantism is also to be read in the context of the trajectory of the various ways in which the city of Jakarta has been imagined and recontested. I summarize post-independence era Jakarta as having three distinctive periods. The Sukarno era, in which the city was engineered as a world city and idealized as becoming a beacon to emerging nations, i.e. other Asian and African nations. The Suharto era saw the city be turned into a neoliberal plaything for his family and business associates, where public dissent was violently silenced. Jakarta exemplified, in the words of Abidin Kusno, urban nationalism, that is, a unified image of the city which represents the nation. The Reformasi era, in the wake of the toppling of Suharto in 1998, has seen a proliferation of identities at the center, where the city's image is increasingly up for grabs. This era has in part been characterized by Kusno, again, as looseness at the center, that is, where everyday Jakartan life no longer clearly articulates a singular nationalist vision. The recontesting of Jakarta by vigilantes, such as the Forum Betawi Rempug, is a part of this reimagining of the nation. As a megacity, Jakarta is characterized by a large informal sector, providing vigilante groups with a vast demographic of potential recruits. This disorderly quality of the city chafes against the will of the city's governors, who seek to impose and to streamline the city into the image of a Singaporean disciplined urban space. As a megacity, Jakarta functions at multiple scales, from the global, regional, national, to the intensely local and parochial. Contemporary vigilantes negotiate a position in between these scales of identity and discourse. As a megacity, Jakarta also witnesses large-scale events in which so-called societal groups, or ormas, perform spectacular urban events in which their claims to the city are announced. Mass gatherings are held in which members dress themselves in a combination of Islamic and Betawi adornments, voicing their reclaiming of urban space. The post-New Order era has witnessed the proliferation of Islamic and religious identities. Part of this has included numerous expressions of Islamic militancy. The Laskar Jihad of the early 2000s sent soldiers to fight in a civil war in Ambon in what was framed as a holy war against local Christians. While in the wake of the 9/11 terrorist attacks, Jemaat Islamiyah became the face of Indonesia's homegrown terrorism. Hezbollah Tahrir, which gained a large following in Indonesia, also imagined a caliphate for Southeast Asia at the expense of the Indonesian nation. Yet since 2017, the organization has been banned for its rejection of the inclusive Pancasila ideology, which underpins the nation's political philosophy. A broad scale of Islamic expressions have become acceptable, but those which challenge the integrity of the nation are swiftly rebuked. One of the FBR's strategies is to consistently reassert its allegiance to the state and to work cooperatively with its institutions. Moral outrage and distrust in the state to effectively police Islamic and nationalist sensibilities has contributed to the mobilization of religious vigilante groups. Notable incidents include the censoring of the Pink Swing Park art exhibition of 2005, the founding of a short-lived Indonesian edition of Playboy, the activities of the Ahmadiyya movement, regarded as a deviant Islamic sect, and the blasphemy of the Jakartan governor Ahok more recently. While vigilante groups may often attract media attention for their spectacular protests, authorities such as the Council for Indonesian Ulama also issue fatwas condemning so-called pornographic imagery or acts of contentious blasphemy. While politicians rarely condemn urban vigilantism committed in the name of protecting Islamic dignity or virtue, religious discourse has become increasingly cacophonous with a range of competing authorities. The demise of the New Order, where political Islam was largely marginalized, has transitioned into a plurality of strident Islamist imaginings of the nation for the nation. Part of the purpose of this paper is to trace the trajectory of the figure of the Preman, a term of strong currency and contestation, roughly translatable as thug, gangster, or hoodlum. Rather than as a direct translation of vigilante, it operates in parallel with conceptions of outlawness, brigandry, or banditry. I use examples drawn from popular culture to show how this figure maintains both consistent qualities while also adapting to suit changing social and political contexts. Usmar Ismail's 1957 film, Tiga Buronan, The Three Fugitives, tells the story of Mat Chodet and his fellow gangsters as they extort and make use of the amenities of a village during the revolutionary era in the 1940s. Their particular target is Pak Harji, the devout Muslim figure who also appears as the sole wealthy individual of the village. Their violence and their threat thereof is their sole means to accessing the village's resources. The bandit is mustachioed, swashbuckling, and charismatic, who takes advantage of this non-governed space. Lewat Jam Malam, a film by Usmar Ismail set during the early independence era, depicts the fate of ex-guerrilla fighter Iskandar as he attempts to settle back into urban life in Bandung, having left the nearby mountains where he was fighting against the Dutch. Iskandar continues to suffer the trauma of the violence and his role in unwittingly killing civilians. Upon his return to civilian life, he attempts to resume his relationship with his fiancée. He is aided in finding a job in the governor's office, yet finds himself ostracized. He quickly alienates himself through resorting to violence to solve his disputes with fellow government officials. Iskandar is in turn feted for his bravery and condemned for his reputation for violence. Back in Bandung, he takes revenge against his commander, who has used the loot of war to fund his post-independence business. Iskandar is both heroic and flawed, and is unable to settle down to respectability or to continue as a mercenary gun for hire. His violence needs to be motivated by moral reasoning. An old fellow fighter who has transitioned into the formal police, however, asks him jealously, "Are you happy living the good life of a Preman?" He sees only Iskandar's detachment and independence rather than his trauma and inability to move on from his past. While Iskandar's fiancée and friends enjoy the parties and the fruits of an emerging middle-class consumption and respectability in the newly independent nation, Iskandar finds himself dislocated from those around him. He can't enjoy these urban pleasures. His cohorts are those who have also not found comfort in the transition from the contested to newly realized nation. After taking his revenge on his commander and trying to escape from possible capture, Iskandar is caught for breaking the curfew. In his attempt to avoid arrest, he is shot and lies dying on the steps of his fiancee's house. The good life of the Preman is short-lived and punished by the state. Iskandar's Premanism is subject to the disciplining and ordering forces of the newly independent nation. As is echoed in the recent statement from Idham Aziz, the head of national police, the state cannot be defeated by Preman. More recently, during the Suharto era, which was characterized by the twin logics of Premanism, in which Preman were needed by the state for the maintenance of state power and for the collection of taxes, while also the urban conditions of Jakarta provided little opportunity for many to gain access to wealth and steady employment. Premanism became a strategy for gaining access to surplus wealth through illegal rents. The intensification of urbanization throughout the Suharto-led New Water era of 1966 to 1988 saw a rise in contestations over urban space, manifested in the burgeoning rivalries of gangs who sought to control informal economies. A crackdown on local thugs, the Preman, became known as the Petrus killings, which occurred during the mid-80s. The stories in author and journalist Seno Gumira Ajidarma's collection, Penembak Mysterious, present the Preman as an ambivalent figure, both as someone who targets fellow urban poor, is a provider for a family, while also being the victim of extrajudicial state violence. As such, the stories articulate the multiple directions and layers of fear in urban Jakarta. The sympathetic portrayal of the urban underclass is consistent throughout Seno's writings, where he frequently depicts the agency of the urban poor in shaping their livelihood. Now I'll move on to the Forum Betawi Rempu. The FBR, as introduced at the start of this paper, which claims to represent the interests of the indigenous people of Jakarta, is one of the post-authoritarian era ormas, which is considered to be a Preman in religious clothing, or Islamic Preman. Founded in 2001, the FBR are known for their involvement in boisterous and threatening protests against groups who are considered to affront certain Islamic or Betawi sensibilities. The FBR frequently appear too in the media for their violent conflicts with rival groups of so-called Preman in contestation over management of informal economies. They are an example of an organization which has apparent interest and claims to religious and ethnic authenticity, while also playing a strong role in the ordering of urban life. Their vigilantism is in part expressed through its forcing of businesses to employ its members, gaining a territorial monopoly on the informal economy. Their capability and will to violence is captured in their motto, "Yang kurang ajar, kita hajar." Let's beat up the impolite, a motto which remains in until today. They seek to protect, to menjaga, both the kampung, informal urban areas of Jakarta, as well as to guard or mengawal the integrity of the Indonesian nation. And the colorful sign on the left there, on my left, is of a message from the President Jokowi to the FBR, congratulating them on their 18th anniversary. In contrast to this reputation for violence and thuggery, however, the current leader of FBR, Lutfi Hakim, is active through his social media account in projecting his image as a respectable, authentic, sincere, devout Betawi figure who works productively with the police and with members of other religious faiths. He has a master's degree and rarely engages in the fiery speeches of his predecessor, Fadloli. Through Hakim, FBR projects itself as not as a force of oppression and disorder, but an extension of the will of the state to protect the nation's inherent unity. I'm interested in the degree to which FBR are developing this range of expressions between the use of violence, cooperation with the state, police, and of course the manner in which they frame their claims in terms of conforming to Islamic norms or the interests of Jakarta's Betawi population. The pandemic has presented another opportunity for the reshaping or repurposing of the state's use for Preman. Well regarded as being street-level enforcers, sundry Preman have been embraced by the state as a means to enforce health protocols during the COVID era. The FBI have been a part of, they have been a part of both the distribution of aid as well as the enforcing punishment for non-mask wearing citizens. Rather than confronting the police, Lutfi Hakim seeks collaboration and cooperation with them, who in turn entrust the FBI with informal policing roles and border legitimacy. After a recent conflict with a rival vigilante group, Lutfi outlined the following conciliatory collaboration with the police. When speaking to the FBR masters, he stated, "I ask for all of you, my friends, to remain calm, patient, and not to do anything that could damage our reputation, such as extrajudicial violence. We have turned this incident over to the police, who are making sure that the situation remains conducive, safe, and peaceful. I thank the police for the force for working so quickly and efficiently in calming the emotions of my friends. I'm sure that the arrest of the suspect is the best outcome to make sure things stay calm. There is no point in carrying out any sweeping or street patrols in order to look out for any other suspects."
And we have to conclude very soon. We are well beyond our times.
Okay. All right. So perhaps just in conclusion, I want to finish with these three images which show how the FBR establishes posts of security throughout Jakarta, and these are their security posts. And so just in conclusion, I just want to say that the FBR is becoming increasingly diversified in its scope and reach within the megacity of Jakarta. Under the leadership of Lutfi Hakim, it also plays a role in advocating interfaith tolerance and condemning violence in the name of Islam. While ormas such as Front Pembela Islam have paid the price for too strident confrontation with the state, the FBR hasn't, by its own accord, has worked collaboratively with the state. That's all. Thank you. Sorry, going over.
I especially like the last parts, to be honest. It's like it's not my place to comment now, I guess, but it was colorful and then, yeah, illustrative, I would say. And then you said you haven't done research and then you will just rely on, but still it was giving us the intricacies of like the activity there. But now we will turn to Davide Casciano, if I hope so.
Casciano.
And then he is going to be the discussant. Davide is a collaborator at the Department of Anthropology at the University of Bologna. And then he's working within the framework of LUXCO, a research project on focusing on the concepts of consumption, crime, and corruption across Africa and Italy, I guess. And then he has conducted ethnographic research in Nigeria, and then was a postdoc at the Wits University in South Africa. And he's also like the co-convener of the EASA network, AnthroCrime, by the way. Then he's giving us like the kind technical support today as well. The floor is yours, Davide.
Thank you so much, Errol. So I'll try to be brief, although this intervention could raise numerous discussion points. First of all, I want to say that I think these interventions are well connected and that I really enjoy them. Vigilante groups, as we know, play a policing role at the borders of state sovereignty. They do so by enacting performances and representation that classical political theories attribute, at least ideally, to an absolute sovereign. When I look at the title of this session, Political Reverberation, I think that vigilantes are inevitably political in their action, not only in their use of an exceptional sovereign violence, but also in their ability to judge everyday issues, punish or spectacularly spare the lives of those who violate the moral boundaries of a community. Vigilantes are somehow political not just when they act in concert with political parties, as they do anyway in Ghana, but as they seek to control other aspects of public life, as we have seen in the case of popular committees in Egypt, when they try to control the prices of market goods, something that the modern neoliberal state would hardly even attempt. The authority that vigilantes express is often reinforced by pre-colonial political registers that still, to this day, have some influences on the post-colonial politics of several countries, albeit from outside the world of the party politics. With their action, therefore, even the destructive ones, vigilante groups create first and foremost foundational social boundaries. And to do so, they often have to interact with other actors at place in the same social space, but often with different resources, such as the police, the army, or the politicians. Then I believe, and I think in agreement with today's interventions, that we can read the complex interaction between the different authorities at place through the prism of criminalization. When the action of these groups are delegitimized, sometimes by the state, sometimes by international agencies, sometimes by the media or by the population, these groups go through a process of criminalization. They are therefore referred to as violent gangsters or criminal agent of chaos. We have seen this happens at times, for example, with the Popular Committee in Egypt or with the Premanism in Jakarta. However, when it is only the state agents that delegitimize the action of these groups, perhaps feeling losing authority over territories or people, we often find ourselves faced with all the romantic ideal of the social bandit drawn by Osborne, in which groups, together with its leaders, even if criminalized, is made of heroic criminals. These rebels would actually defend the population that in turn protects them. The construction of mythologies around these social bandits is essential and interesting to analyze, as done in this session by Fuller in Jakarta. Whenever it comes from literature, cinema, the internet, or as we have seen in Egypt from the media, outlaws, social bandits are sustained by powerful emotions, such as fear and the admiration they manage to inspire in the population. Without understanding their popular aesthetics, we will not understand how these groups construct a sovereign space for themselves, however we want to define their sovereignty, which is indeed something very complex. the same figure of the social bandit described by Ostband has been widely criticized because it greatly simplified the political field in which these figures operate. It is not only that it is difficult to imagine a people bandits as a poor rebel for a cause, but the very classical and ideal representation of absolute sovereignty is probably just fictional. The state authority over territories is indeed a representation. To construct it, it is often necessary for the state agent to practically articulate their power through other agents, such as vigilant groups. This negotiation might not lead to a weak state, but to a sovereignty effectively working as articulated with individuals and groups with different goals, tactics, and strategies. Whether they are political vigilantist groups negotiating with political parties in Ghana, people committees negotiating with a changing political scenario in Egypt, or vigilant organization and individual preman embraced in time of crisis by the police forces in Jakarta. Some of these groups with whom the state agent negotiates might also not be interested in defending the population at first. However, they might govern it socially, politically, juridically, and more effectively than other actors or groups. Another crucial point that I think was made by the presentation today is that the social spaces occupied by these groups can change, and indeed almost always change dynamically over time, as we have seen in Egypt, or as we can conclude from the ambiguity surrounding the figure of the preman in Jakarta, until the use of the language or religion allow its boundaries to be further reconfigured. If I think of my research experience in the Niger Delta region in Nigeria, I can recall this continuous shift in the social political field happening many times among the local armed groups and their charismatic leaders. For example, a tech home in Creek Island near Port Harcourt in Italy came up with a university confraternity that, besides student services, trade narcotics off campus. He later set up a group called Niger Delta Vigilante, intending to bring the demands of the exploited population by the government and the international oil companies to public attention and politics. Today, despite his action, which involved kidnappings and sabotage, Ateketom is no longer a bandit, a rebel for the people, a vigilante or a criminal in the government eyes. Although it was all of these things, he is a respectable political broker, essential to Governor Krika, a sovereign, traditional, and luxurious chief, but at the same time, for a part of the population, he is still a maverick. He himself, after all, likes to publicly boost nicknames like the Godfather, inspiring as much fear as respect and authority. This is not only because the boundaries between the legal and the legal words are often intertwined, but because it is only with the collaboration of other groups, vigilant groups, that the state agent can effectively exercise the power, thus reinforcing a sovereign power, however fictional, and this government. However, no final agreement will be ever established once and for all in such a dynamic process of antagonism and complicity. Given their ambiguity and the plurality of representation that cut across them, this highly complex political, social landscape can only be analyzed through a careful ethnographic, dynamist, and processual approach, as the intervention today have well done already, at least in my opinion. In this respect, I would like to make some questions and to ask Kyei and Berckmoes, I hope I pronounced the surname good, if there was any chance in the research to focus not only on the opinions of the vigilantes or of the politicians, but also on other actors involved in the same areas before and after the election, such as the religious leaders or the market leaders, and which kind of representation about these groups emerged from their point of view. To put things more in a kind of a long-term perspective, I also wanted to ask Fuller how the preman figure was represented in colonial times, in the popular literature and imaginary, and whether he thinks that some of these features are still relevant today. I would like to ask a similar question to Cantini and Kreil, referring to the popular committees in the Arabic political vocabulary, and how and if this is influential in the popular debates today about which role popular committees should play in representing the population. So I should stop here, and I hope that this comment and question may put the debate a little bit further. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Davide. And I think the presenters might want to respond. I will ask you to take maybe 3-4 minutes and then respond, and then we will start with Daniele, Aymon, and then Richard, and then Andy again. Daniele, would you like to go?
Yes. I don't know if Aymon wants to go first, so we invert the.
Yeah, well, for the pre-colonial time, you have a very similar figure to the one we saw in Indonesia, which is the futua, which is the bandit at the neighborhood level who is at the same time terrorizing and protecting people. Is a kind of warrant of morality at the neighborhood level. You find him a lot in the books of Naguib Mahfouz, for instance, the Nobel Prize, the Literature Nobel Prize. However, I think one thing which is a bit different with the Ligan Sha'biya is that, how to say, the word, it's much more anchored, I think, from what I saw from previous examples, from previous uses in Arabic in the socialist imaginary of the Nasser time, and also of socialists, and because you find it a prominent use of famous use of the Ligan Sha'biya, it's in the system of the Jamahiriya of Gaddafi, which was known as an admirer of Gamal Abdel Nasser. And therefore, I mean, I think here you have a break, because the people who were participating in the popular committees during the revolution in Egypt, they were not the bandits. The bandits, they were also the bandits, but it was more the idea that all the people come to protect the neighborhood. It was less linked to such mythical figures of the strong men of the neighborhoods. Yes, I don't know, Daniele, what would you like to add something? And thank you so much, Davide, for your comments. I mean, it's really great. I mean,
indeed, thanks, Davide, for this for the very little time that you have. And I'm not sure if I understood your comment correctly, but I would like to say that so these popular committees are not only, as Aymon just said, have a genealogy as a concept. And what is interesting is that in the over 600 articles that I read, there is not once a definition of this. These are always taken as being self-evident. Everybody knows what a popular committee is, despite the fact that this is untrue. Because, for example, in some cases, so if there is a moment, or if there is a strike, for example, I'm still talking about Egypt, workers in a company could form a popular committee to protect the company premises while the strike happens. Yeah, so this is in Egypt happening. But this idea that, the people form its own committees to protect itself, this is a bit different than the futua or the preman, in my understanding, because the people is, at least in principle, understood as the nation. So these committees protect a street, or protect a compound, or protect a neighborhood, but always with the understanding that they are protecting the big house, as they call it in some interviews reported in these newspapers, which is the country. And so so this idea that spontaneity, because popular committees have to be spontaneous, so there is no membership, there is no fixed membership, as some was mentioned in the presentation about Ghana. So you have long-lasting members. This is not the case in popular committees. The popular committees are spontaneous. You may have somebody who had previous experiences in other Ligan, but these Ligan are a phenomenon happening here and now. And so this idea that the relationship with the body politics, or with the social body, is always an ascriptional relation. So the revolutionary Ligan, at least, do present themselves as being the truest face of the Egyptian people. The problem is that, as I'm a fan of Luc Boltanski and his understanding of the social in terms of conflict and critique, that this is never true. The people is never united. And this is evident at all levels. I mean, this is, so any time that somebody pretends to speak in the name of the people, you always have the possibility of contesting. And but yes, I'm not sure if I'm understanding what you're if I'm actually getting back at what you asked. And I would have a counter question, but maybe we should first leave the floor open and then.
Yes, maybe Davide will clarify afterwards, but first let's go through the all speakers, and then you can also ask your question. And Richard, would you like to respond as well?
Yeah, so the question I got there, if in answer, is about before and after elections, how the people perceived political vigilante groups. Okay, so if that's the question, so there are the kind of ambivalence in terms of how the people perceive political vigilante groups. One is how they see them as benefactors, and the other one is how they see them as so it's whether they are in opposition to those people or whether they are in favor. So when they are in favor in terms of how they organize their activities, they can be classified as those violent people, so those violent groups. So even on the field, going to them, there were some comments as you have to be careful going to these people because they can be violent. So there is that kind of perception within the community. But at the same time, when it comes to their community growth development projects, which are also for the whole community, then it benefits all of them. But still, they still have that kind of interest because the interests of the political vigilante groups are not just one. So at a different level, so even though they are coming up with community development projects, they want to also have an interest in it. So if they have a public toilet built, they want to manage it because they see it as a source of revenue for them. So the perception of the people are in different stages and different forms, depending on which side those people are standing. So that's how I would describe or present the perception of the people in the eyes of the political vigilante groups.
Thanks, Richard. Andy?
Yeah. Thank you, David, so much for your very well considered summary of the presentations this afternoon. I personally would love to read what you've written at some point. I think I'm not too up to date with some of the earlier readings or the configurations of the Preman, but my understanding is that the Preman comes from the word for free man, meaning the Dutch word for a free or a freed slave. And so my understanding that it's the origins are of an individual who was complicit in protecting the interests of the VOC in colonial Batavia. The Batawi people are, it can have contentious origins, of course, but it's related to an ethnic mix or that were apparently drawn on, inclusive of these freed or liberated slaves. So the Preman is, I guess, a highly criminalized figure, but the accoutrements of religion in the post-New Order era are, I guess, a highly legitimizing force in the reimagining of this figure. Thanks.